Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my LPL Round 3 overview and analysis video in the Summer Split Playoffs. We've had a lot of really good games and a lot of really good series up until this point in the playoffs, but this is where things really start to become important. We have our 6 teams that have officially made it, I guess, to top 6, but also have officially qualified for the regional qualifier. At the very least, these are the 6 teams that have the ability to go to Worlds to represent the LPL, and so we're really down to the nitty-gritty now. We're going to be seeing some Worlds teams in today's episodes, more than likely, and so really getting a good idea of how these teams are performing at the current moment, what their strengths and weaknesses are, is going to be even more important than usual. And of course, round 3 is the final round before double elimination starts, and so losing today is the worst time to lose. You got all the way here, and then you weren't able to close it out, and so you want to be able to win today at the very least, so you get that extra life in the LPL playoffs. But I'm interested to know what you guys thought of today's series down in the comment section below. Who did you think was going to win, and did it live up to your expectations? A couple of players performing really well today. Were you expecting those players to play well? Did you expect the players that played poorly to do so? I'm really interested to hear you guys' feedback down in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Of course, if you're new here, what we do is we go game by game in each series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game, and at the end of each series, I'll be giving a player of the series to kind of talk about who I think really tied everything together for their individual team. Of course, at the end of the video, we're going to go ahead and preview the next round of action. We'll have our top 4 teams in the LPL by the end of the video, so a lot of really, really good stuff. Stick around for that, but it's time to jump right into the analysis. We've got quite a few games to cover today, and so let's kick it off with our first series, our upper series, if you will, the higher part of the bracket, the first part of the bracket. We had probably the more interesting of the two, at least on paper, in my opinion, one that I was very much looking forward to. I really like both of these teams and their outlook moving forward. We had a matchup between the number 4 seeded Top Esports and the number 8 seeded Edward Gaming. Really, really fun matchup on paper here. Top Esports has been a team that has looked really good over the course of the summer split, and honestly, for most of spring, they also looked relatively good. They just collapsed down the stretch. A lot of things started to go wrong for this team, and it really does feel like they figured out and solved a lot of their major issues, which is, of course, incredibly important. In my opinion, they have the MVP on their team in Jackie Love. Thought he was so important to what this Top Esports team was doing, but Tian was really good throughout this split. I think there were moments where Mark was really good throughout this split. I have been concerned a bit about the solo laners for Top Esports. I think that there can be a little bit more hit and miss. I should say they can be a little bit more hit and miss than some of the other solo laners on some of the better teams in the league. Rookie in particular, I think, just needed to be a little bit more consistent throughout the year. He's had a couple of more bad games than you're really used to seeing from a player like Rookie, and, you know, it's not like matchups are going to be particularly easy here in the playoffs. And then Wayward's never really been a superstar in the top lane, but I think he's been more than capable of being able to win with if you have him there. And so Top Esports, very top-heavy team, you know, appropriately speaking, but I do think that they have enough top-end talent to be able to be one of the big contenders in the LPL. And then for EDG on the other side, basically the opposite, right? Like, this team should, on paper, be the best team in the LPL, or one of the best teams in the LPL, especially with how they've been performing recently. It's just a lot of their problems have come in terms of cohesion and being able to close out games efficiently. This team does not team fight particularly well, which I worry about, but their early game advantages that they're able to generate are incredibly consistent, and a lot of these players are ridiculously talented. I think Uzi coming in has had a really good split. Ale is absolutely on fire right now, and Mako's had a really good playoffs as well, and so, you know, if you can get that version of EDG, they very well could take down a team like Top Esports, who has some exploitable players, like Wayward, like potentially Rookie. A lot of people seem to think that Mark is in that vein as well, even if I don't think he's quite as exploitable as people give him credit for. But I think this is going to be a very, very close series. I picked Top Esports, but like I said in my preview video last week, I really do think that it's just a toss-up. It could be absolutely anybody who ends up coming out of this series into the top 4, and so I'm really, really intrigued to see what ends up happening. But with all that being said, it's time to jump into the game analysis. And so, of course, going game by game, we get to kick it off with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Top Esports, they are able to take the first game of this series. They're able to go up 1-0, and I talk about this a lot on the channel, but being able to generate momentum and confidence in that first game of the series, I think is incredibly important, and especially winning in the way that they did, really just being the better team over this 35-minute stretch. Edward Gaming did have some moments where they were trying to fight back. They were able to get that Baron and, start to show at least a little bit of fire, but Top Esports was just too far ahead at that point, and they were able to kind of push forward and just win the game. I think for TES, really the big positive to take away is that a lot of the players that you were concerned about in this series actually really did step up in this first game at the very least. I know Reddit in particular has had a really hard time accepting the fact that Tion has been very good over the course of this split, but I really liked his Nocturne. I think a lot of people are just seeing that as a pick that you basically only play with something like a Nico or an Annie or something that wants to be on the flank, wants to be full initiation and engaged, but I think something like the LeBlanc also falls really well into this category because she can access the backline as well, just kind of in a different way. You can get good flanks off on LeBlanc, but you could also just full dash in, and it's very difficult to stop if you're EDG, especially when the lights are out, and I think that combo was a major problem for EDG in this game. Player of the game pretty obviously going to go to Rookie in the mid lane. This is the kind of performance that you really needed to see. Rookie has had a penchant for stepping up in the playoffs, for being a big game performer, and it's really good to see that at least be kind of true here in the first game of his 2023 Summer Split playoffs. He was awesome on the LeBlanc, creating so much action, dealing so much damage. This champion is so strong right now. I saw some people talking about how LeBlanc is not really dealing all that much damage. I think that was in the EDG OMG series. That's just obviously not true. I don't think I've seen a game where LeBlanc hasn't topped the damage charts where she's been in pro. I know that's kind of what LeBlanc does, but the safety with which she can get a lot of her poke off and her full engage can be so oppressive. It's a really strong champion right now. Might not be Jace, might not be Tristana, but still a really good mid laner. Probably the third best mid in the entire game at the moment, and Rookie making her look like the first. An utterly dominant performance from him. And again, if you're going to get him to step up and be more consistent, that's going to completely change the outlook, I think, of Top Esports. They're going to be a significantly more difficult team to stop if Rookie, gets back into form of being a top 3-ish mid laner in the LPL. And then, like I said, Tion was also very important in this game. Being able to just play the Nocturne at a high level is something that I think really unlocked a lot of what Top Esports wanted to do in this game. Being able to play really aggressive on the map and, link up with something like the LeBlanc to be able to create, skirmishes and surprise a lot of people. It just made EDG have to play so safe in the mid game, and it really expanded Top Esports' lead very heavily. Now, their zone control wasn't nearly as heavy, like when they're trying to gain objectives, things like that. It wasn't nearly as oppressive as I think it would have been, had they had a different comp, but the Kai'Sa and the Ornn really help out with that a lot, and I think, in general, the jungle mid duo, I think, played really well. I think Mark had a great game on the Nautilus, really good engages, never really put himself in any sort of bad positions. Sometimes Mark can be a little bit too overeager in terms of engages and trying to create opportunities for the team, but I thought he was near perfect in this game. Just a really good game. Jackie Love was solid. A couple of overextensions, but that's Jackie Love. You're going to take the good with the bad, and almost all of it's been good this year. If you're going to have 5% bad, you're going to take the 95% good kind of thing. And then Wayward, I think, was relatively fine on the Ornn. I don't think he really did all that much, but I don't think he really needed to do all that much. He's Ornn in a game where you've got a Nocturne LeBlanc diving on the backline. You just need to make sure that the Kai'Sa is in a relatively decent spot, and I think Wayward did that job. So really good game one from top, and then EDG falling in game one, not particularly surprising. A couple of their flaws ended up coming out here. They lost in the early game with a pretty early game comp. You want to get ahead on things like the Jace and the Varus. You want to be able to put yourself in a position where you're going into the mid game with a little bit more prio than Top Esports, and you just really weren't able to do that in this game, and I think that really did hurt their strategy a lot. Now, they didn't give up. They had a really good fight around Baron that allowed them to get that, but outside of that, there really was not a lot of comeback potential. They were simply just too far behind after what was a really bad mid game, getting caught out pretty consistently. My dud of the game is going to go to Uzi in the bot lane. We talked about Jackie Love being overextended in a couple of certain situations. Well, it's very hard to play an immobile AD carry like Varus into Nocturne and LeBlanc. Very peculiar draft here coming in from EDG, just drafting Varus and hoping and praying that the Braum and the Maokai and the Poppy are going to be able to protect you from all of this perma dive coming in. Obviously Nocturne and LeBlanc, but the Nautilus as well, and even Ornn ultimate. Kai'Sa diving the backline if she hits W. There are so many ways to get on this immobile AD carry that Uzi was never never really going to have a good time this game, and he really, really didn't. Mako wasn't particularly good on the Braum either. I really like this pick just in general. I think Braum has really risen up in my priority rankings for supports, but only so much you can do, again, to protect. It's not really the best Braum game here, other than the Kai'Sa and the Ornn, of course. Not really a ton that you can do. You can eat the Nautilus Hook as well, but the two main threads being, of course, Nocturne and LeBlanc can just kind of go around you, so not entirely great there. I don't think the rest of the team was great. Fofo didn't exert as much pressure as he needed to on the Jace in the early game, and Rookie was able to get a lot of pressure on the map because of it. Jeje was fine, I guess, probably the best performing member of EDG, but even he couldn't really do all that much. Ale was really good in lane, but you know, it's Poppy. Like, you're not going to be able to completely change the game if your entire team is losing. And so, for EDG, I think there are definitely some things they need to clean up, but I think it goes back to their playstyle. If they can win early, I think they're going to be able to win some games. If they get blasted early, it's going to be a lot more difficult because late game has always kind of been their problem anyways. But for Top Esports, really nice win to be able to generate that confidence early, and more specifically, really nice game from Rookie. Hopefully, this is the kind of form that you're going to get from him out of the entire playoffs, but that's just game number one. Doesn't, you know, completely end the series or anything like that. EDG absolutely has the opportunity to tie it up here, but Top Esports probably wants to take that dominating 2-0 lead. So who's going to be able to take game two? Is it going to be Top or is it going to be EDG? Well, we're going to find out now because the winner of game number 2 was Edward Gaming. They are able to take game number 2 in this series. They're able to tie it up at 1 apiece, and obviously that's crazy important. You do not want to go down 2-0 against a team like Top Esports. You don't want to be in a position where you have to win 3 games in a row against Rookie and Jackie and Sion and all of these world champions that you're playing into. And so for EDG, very, very important win, and I thought they played really well in this game. It was a relatively close game in the early game, not nearly as much of a dominant performance. I was really looking for that as the area where EDG needed to kind of gain a lot of their advantages, because I just don't think that they're a great late game team, and so they need to go into the back half of the game, I think, with a pretty big lead or some momentum to be able to generate, you know, most of their wins against a really good team, or at least that would be my guess. But what they did was crack open the game in the mid game, which I'm really impressed by, being able to play the map really well, using the pressure that Jace and Lucian in particular offer to just be able to take fight after fight after fight towards the middle of the map, and just kind of breaking open the game, like I said. Really, really what you want to see from a comp like this, and I think they executed it really, really well. Player of the game for me is going to go to Mako in the support position. Really good game on the Braum, and this is the kind of game where it's just like, yeah, Braum completely stops everything. Great into Xayah, great into Nautilus, can frontline against the Ornn, can frontline against the Sejuani, is more than happy to eat a 0 damage. Like, Braum is just incredibly strong into comps like this, and it's not just comps like this, right? There are going to be some comps that are a little bit stronger against Braum that he can still do really well into, but the comps that Braum, like, really does well into, he just kind of wins against, and I thought Mako piloted it really, really well, creating a lot of the plays, playing aggressive on that champion, and that's something that I think was really the case for EDG in the mid game for the entirety of this team. I think Jeje was also really fantastic in this game on the Maokai, just being everywhere. A lot of times, it really does feel like AP Maokai in particular doesn't really have a ton of pressure, but you do have to kind of build it sometimes. When you're running Renekton and Jace and Lucian, you don't want to, you know, be going up against a triple tank lineup like Top Esports has and not have any sort of AP damage to complement that. And so AP Maokai is kind of a necessity in a game like this, but you know, Jeje, I think, piloted it really well. You're going to be a lot squishier, but man, those saplings are really going to hurt, and you're going to be able to actually do a lot in a team fight. That Q is deceptive in terms of what it's going to be able to do, especially if you're able to get on the Xayah or get on the Azir with the W. It's going to be a lot more damage coming in, and so Jeje and Mako looking really good. Uzi obviously following up on a lot of the engages incredibly well. This is the kind of performance you want to see. Mid-game AD carry and a mid-game dominant performance coming in from Uzi. Typically speaking, this is the part of the game that I think he most excels in, at least going back to, like, his heyday in, you know, 2015, 2016. Like, this is the part of the game that I think Uzi really, like, is the best at, and I think that showed off here. The Lucian, I think, is a really good pick for them, even if I don't think it's particularly strong in the current meta. Fofo was doing a lot of damage on the Jace. Ale didn't really make any sort of mistakes on the Renekton and was winning lane. Overall, just a good game from EDG. They knew exactly what their win condition was, and they played towards it at an incredibly high level. Mako was fantastic, Jeje was fantastic, and the rest of the team really did follow up. So, really, really exactly what you wanted to see in terms of a bounce-back game from them. But then, for For Top Esports on the other side, it was kind of the opposite. It just didn't feel like they were proactive enough in this game. You've got kind of conflicting playstyles, but in a way that I kind of like with the Azir, the Xayah, the Ornn, you know, a bit of scaling, a bit of early game pressure. You kind of have a little bit of everything in this comp. I was really looking for this team to play towards bot lane in the early game, and while I definitely think they tried, I think Uzi and Mako did a really good job shutting down a lot of the pressure. Rookie in particular just had none in the mid lane on the Azir. It's going to be difficult to generate that into something like the Jace, but he was really not out on the map. He was not making plays for the team, and so it really was up to Jackie Love and Tion in particular to be able to win this game for the team. Now, this was a formula they went to a lot in the regular season, and so it wasn't going to be impossible, but when you look at this comp, like, the Xayah's just not going to have enough power on her own to be able to take down, you know, a lot of this shutdown from EDG, a lot of this intentional lockdown or damage negation. There's just too much going on for the Xayah to be able to win, and so when EDG was able to generate and break open that game in the mid game, there's just not enough to be able to pull it back. But done of the game for me is going to go to Mark in the support position on this Nautilus. A meh game coming out from him. I don't necessarily think he was like the worst support in the entire world, but really not a single good Nautilus engaged this game, which was definitely a little bit frustrating. Now, obviously, a lot more difficult to play Nautilus into Braum, just because he can just stand in front of you and tank everything that you want to do. There's really no way to actually deal with that other than the ultimate, right? And so, you know, Mako kind of just shutting down a lot of the engage threat that Top Esports ends up having, but I think Mark could have played a lot better in the early game. You want it to be a little bit more aggressive, and that's usually not something that I say about this bot lane. Usually they are appropriately aggressive, and I think Mark was towards the back half, but by that point, I think it was just a little bit too late. Rookie, like I said, also didn't have a very good game on the Azir. He was nowhere on the map, only involved in 2 kills, not exactly what you want to see. Wayward was all right on the Ornn. Tion was at least trying to make plays on the Sedge, although none of them were working, and like I said, a lot of this game was up to Jackie Love on the Xayah, but it's just not a game where the Xayah can take over and win on her own, and so it was a little bit of a difficult challenge for Top Esports. Overall, you're going to be a little bit disappointed that you dropped this game. You probably didn't want to be in a position where you were tied up 1-1. You wanted to be 2-0, but at this point, it just resets to a best of 3, and so you still have to have a lot of that confidence. This was a little bit of a draft gap, in my opinion, in terms of execution. EDG just executed on their win con significantly better than Top Esports did, and that's going to happen every once in a while, but you've got to be able to get back on your horse. If you can dominate the early game, I think that's really going to be a big turning point in this series. If we have a team that walks out at 10 minutes up, you know, 2K gold, I think that's going to be a big deal, and so Top Esports, I would like to see them get back to that. They're also very consistent in the late game because of how good Jackie Love is, and so I'm not really too worried about this team. And then for EDG on the other side, really nice win, keeping yourself, you know, in a really good position in this series. I think you found a strategy that could end up working, but similar advice to you that I gave to Top Esports. You should be playing for the map. You should be playing for the early game, and you should be playing to generate leads. If you can do what you did in this game, again, you're going to be in a pretty decent spot. So, very big game here in Game 3. Being able to take, you know, the momentum and the advantage in this series is going to be big because both of these teams are incredibly talented. So, who's going to be able to grab it? Well, we're going to find out now in Game number 3 because the winner of Game number 3 was Top Esports. They are able to take the third game in this series. They're able to regain control going up 2-1, which is obviously super important when you're going up against a team like EDG, but in general, again, it's Rookie stepping up and being such an integral part of this team, really creating so many advantages. I don't think this one was as much just Rookie dominating as maybe game number 1 was, which I really did think was just super Rookie favored on this LeBlanc, you know, everywhere on the map, winning lane, skirmishing, being able to dominate in the late game. I think this was a little bit more back and forth. I think Fofo actually played the early laning phase really well on the Jace and, you know, actually activated a lot of opportunities, I will say, for EDG. I think Rookie just outplayed him towards the back half of the game, which is certainly not something that, you know, was a negative for Fofo. We'll get into him in a bit, but he's Jace. There's only so much he's going to be able to do to try and be able to match the kind of pressure that LeBlanc can put out there, but a great, great game from Top Esports. They didn't dominate in the early game quite as much as you would think for like a 28-minute win, but a huge team fight at around 20 minutes ends up breaking this game wide open for Top Esports, and they really never look back at that point. Player of the game is pretty obviously going to go to Rookie in the mid lane. He's been the best player on TES throughout this series so far, which is super impressive. The 2 games of LeBlanc have looked great. I imagine that that's going to be a pick that ends up becoming super high priority towards the back half of this series, but really, really good stuff from him. We were worried about whether or not he was going to be able to continue to adapt and continue to be a big positive for this team going into the playoffs because 2023 in general has been a down year for him, but I mean, he's answering all of those questions. He is, you know, foregoing all of those doubts at the current moment with his LeBlanc play, and it's really good to see. I do think that if you get blue side again for Top Esports, you simply have to ban out the LeBlanc if you're Edward Gaming. Like, if you're on red side, like, LeBlanc has to be the ban, because they're going to pick it up on first pick, and Rookie's going to do super well on it. He's already proven that he can beat you on it twice, and you really don't want to give him the third opportunity to do that, so really good stuff overall from him. I thought Tion was, like, very sneakily awesome this game. Jackie Love also was fantastic. We'll get to him in a second. But Tion was everywhere on the map on this Lee Sin. A pick that I'm honestly really not a fan of at the current moment. I think it's much weaker than people will give it credit for at the moment. I think it's a very much outclassed jungler in terms of what it does comparatively to what a lot of the meta junglers do right now. But obviously, a lot of people play Lee Sin at a super high level. And so player skill, for the most part, is going to trump what meta is at the current moment. But, you know, Tion pulling it out and being able to dominate Jeje on the Maokai on it is really, really big. Jeje has actually been really important for this team in terms of being able to generate mid-game pressure in particular, and Tion, I think just having more of that mid-game pressure on the Lee Sin, being able to move around with the LeBlanc, was a big reason, you know, why Top Esports was able to generate so much of that momentum that ended up leading into their big team fight win, and so good stuff overall from them. Jackie Love was fantastic in this game on the Varus. The amount of poke that this champion does is actually ludicrous. There really isn't a lot of ways to play into him. It's just very difficult. You kind of have to sit there and take a lot of the damage and just kind of deal with it. You were hoping that Sivir Spell Shield and just the range in general coming in from EDG was going to be something that could negate some of what the Varus was doing, but it didn't work. It absolutely did not work, and Jackie Love was a big part of it. Mark had some good engages this game, even if I don't think he was perfect. Wayward was generally fine, again, on the Gnar. Ale was actually really good and definitely dominated the laning phase, but Wayward more than made up for it by being a pretty good team fight threat on the Gnar towards the back half of this game. But in general, Top Esports was really running through this LeBlanc again, and that's going to be a consistent thread for them so long as they get this champion over and over again, in my opinion. And then for EDG on the other side, I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't think this draft is it for me. I think that you're relying too much on your early game success, and while I do believe that that is, like, the way that EDG should be winning a lot of these games, and while they did have a relatively good early game, mostly because Fofo, I think, played really well in the early game on the Jace, they just weren't actually able to sustain anything. I think the Kennen was a really strong pick, and I think it did some good things, but you're relying on the Sivir to be able to carry you towards the back half of the game, and like we said earlier, there are just too many tools to be able to get onto the back line if you're Top Esports here. You've got potential Gnar engage to kind of get rid of the front line, which can open the door for Lee Sin. LeBlanc full engage. You've got a Nautilus errant hook, which we did see throughout this game, and even just Varus poke throughout, like, a lot of the skirmishes was a big problem for Uzi, and he was really not all that useful this game. He's going to get my dud of the game again here. In game number 3, he's consistently being put on picks that really rely on the team being able to enable him, and this team has not been very good at enabling Uzi throughout this split. Uzi's been great at being able to generate his own leads and his own advantages, but he's really not been great at receiving resources from the rest of EDG, and I think that that was definitely apparent in this one. I think Mako didn't do a very good job on the Braum in this third game of being able to kind of stop a lot of the things that were going to try to get onto the Sivir, but, you know, Jeje, I think, had a significantly worse game in game 3 than he did at any point in games 1 and 2, where I actually thought he was relatively good for this team. I say actually as if that's a big surprise. Jeje's a really good player. It wasn't a surprise that he played well, but he was very consistent through the first half. I do think the solo laners did step up a bit in this game, but only so much you can do. The Kennen on the flanks was dealing damage, but there were so many tools to be able to avoid those, and especially, you know, towards the back half of the game, it really wasn't EDG that was on the aggressive, and then, you know, Fofo did his Jace thing. He generated his lead, but the team couldn't really capitalize on it at all, and they ended up losing too much pressure in the mid game to actually be able to make use of it. And so for EDG, just kind of a meh performance. I want to see more consistency coming out of this team. If you're going to put Uzi on something like Sivir, you need significantly more tools to be able to enable it. Either that or give him something that he can make himself safe on. You know, obviously I like the Xayah. It was banned out this game, but there are so many options for AD carries that I think are going to be significantly more proactive here than what the Sivir ended up offering you. But a really good game for Top Esports and a big win to give them the advantage in this series. Are they going to be able to capitalize on it and keep it? Or is this going to be, you know, a series that ends up going to 5? Is EDG going to be able to rebound and push us to a Silver Scrapes final game? Well, we're going to find out right now, because the winner of game number 4 was Edward Gaming. They are able to take game number 4. They're able to even up this series at 2 apiece, and we are going to a Silver Scrapes game number 5 here in the LPL playoffs. This is what I wanted to see out of the series. I wanted to see both teams going back and forth, showing a lot of the positives that we know they can have. I think Top Esports has definitely shown up in today's series. Rookie has been fantastic. Tian has been fantastic, and I think that jungle mid duo has really run a lot of things. And so for EDG to be able to play through topside in game number 4 and just be able to dominate and take the game relatively easily, I think is super impressive. It really blew open very quickly for EDG. This game was really close for a while until it really wasn't. I think a lot of that is the laning threat that EDG in general offered, but man, did their top 3 just play so crazy well in this game. Uzi and Mako definitely also played well. I want to give them a lot of credit in that same vein, but Ale, Jejet, Fofo were fantastic in this and really did create more opportunities, I think, than basically anybody else throughout this series, maybe other than Rookie in any individual game. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game for me is going to go to Ale in the top lane on this. Poppy, really crazy good performance. He was great in lane, did a great job shutting down the Cassante, but for the most part, that's just going to be a wet noodle fight for her, like the top lane. But Ale somehow turned it into a lane that he could just, like, utterly dominate. That should have not been possible, but that's the kind of skill difference that I think these two teams are looking at in terms of the top lane matchup. Ale is just that damn good, and he was so important towards the teamfight stage in the late game as well. Look at all the things that Poppy actually does a really good job of shutting down. You can avoid the escape from Rookie. You know, things like Rel and Sejuani as engages are significantly harder. Even Cassante is significantly more difficult to pilot because of that Poppy, and so there are a lot of things that Ale actually does a really good job of being able to shut down with this pick. And man, he just played it at such a ridiculously high level. What a game from him. He really has been the best top laner in the playoffs so far, and that's certainly not me underselling anybody. Like, he really has just been that good. Fantastic stuff from him. I think Jeje has been sneakily amazing. I really think he might be the best AP Maokai player in the world at the current moment. The dude just does so much damage on this champion so consistently. He's never really in a position to ever be capitalized on in the same kind of way. He honestly plays tank Maokai significantly worse, which is very weird to say, but I think having those aggressive options on a champion that has so much natural bulk just gives him a lot of ability to play more aggressive, and I think he likes that. I think he likes the playstyle that he can create when he gets to build this champion with damage, and he, again, did it really well. The amount of damage that Maokai was doing was actually ludicrous. And then Fofo. I know it's really cool and fun and easy to hate on Fofo right now, but I still think he's a really good player for this team, and he's been really good. The Jace has been the big pick for him throughout all of 2023. When you look back on spring, that was something that I highlighted super consistently. I know he doesn't necessarily get a lot of credit for that. You know, when you think of Fofo, you think of a lot of mages, right? Specifically things like the Zoe come to mind for him, but I think the Jace definitely in 2023 has been like his signature pick and the thing that EDG has been able to consistently be able to play around the most. He's very good in lane on it, and honestly, his damage, his shock blast towards the back half of games are crazy. Like, when you have sapling damage and then shock blast damage and Varus poke coming in, it's very difficult to actually contest this EDG team, especially from Fog of War. And so, very good stuff from the top side of the map. Really one of the better games that I would say EDG, probably the best game that EDG has played in this series up until this point. Uzi and Mako were good as well. I just don't think they were nearly as much of a focal point as everything that was happening on the top side of the map. So I would just say generically great stuff from EDG and a great game from them to send it to a game 5. A lot of momentum generated from this. And then for Top Esports, not really the way that you wanted to lose game number 4. You wanted to close out the series here. I think that you were actually in a pretty decent situation draft-wise to be able to do that, but we've seen the Azir-Xayah double carry duo just not work out all that much globally at the current moment, and I think this was just another example of that. I'm not going to say that they're, like, not complementary styles, because both, I think, can function in basically every stage of the game. Azir is a pretty decent laner, and Xayah is definitely someone who can hyper carry with damage, but I don't think either of them really propagate each other as much as some other combos that we've seen throughout recently. I think the Jace and the Varus were just very difficult to play into here, but a lot of Top Esports losing was just not having control over the map in the mid game, and, you know, some of their players just getting outplayed. I'll say it, like, dud of the game is going to go to Wayward in the top lane. Pretty bad game from him on the Cassante. Ale is significantly better as a top laner than Wayward, and I think that that was highlighted here. As much as I do defend Wayward, a lot of it comes down to me saying Wayward is good enough to be able to win with, and I do agree with that. Wayward is good enough to be able to win with, but you're not going to win because of him, and when he goes against some of the best top laners in the world, it can be a little bit of a struggle like it was in this game. I think Mark was not particularly good on the Rel. Sometimes those engages just aren't quite as consistent, and Tian, you know, wasn't all that good on the Sejuani. Had some pressure in the early game, but lost it, and I don't think he was nearly as impactful in team fights as that champion should be. And then, you know, Rookie was trying to deal some damage on the Azir. Jackula really had no business really ever being relevant in this game on the Xayah. I just think in general, Top Esports went towards a comp that doesn't necessarily play into their strengths. Rookie has been moving around a lot in the mid game, and I think that's really been a way for Top Esports to win games this series, and Jackie Love, I don't think has played the Xayah all that well across this year. I think it's been one of his worst, like, meta picks, if you will, and so for TES, you're now on the brink of elimination. You don't want to be a one and done in the playoffs with, you know, regional qualifiers coming up. You want to get some of that momentum so you can be going into that tournament feeling pretty good. And also, like, this team is good enough to be able to compete with some of the other teams left in this tournament. They do not want to go out here. But EDG have been on absolute fire recently and lately in the playoffs. And so I would not be surprised at all if they were able to close out this series. But are they going to be able to do it, or is TES going to take this final game and prove once and for all that blue side is the most OP thing in the entire game? Well, we're going to find out right now, because it is winner take all, game number 5. And the winner of game number 5 was Top Esports. They are able to take the 5th and final game of this series. They're closing it out in Silver Scrapes, and they're going to be moving on into the top 4 stage. That means Edward Gaming's summer split technically ends here. Their season does not, because they have qualified for the regional qualifier, as everybody left in the tournament has. But congratulations to TES for being able to overcome this actually pretty good EDG team. Like, they're not pushovers by any means. This is not an easy victory to be able to take, and it really does prove that Top Esports is one of the best teams in the LPL, because I do think EDG is one of the best teams in the LPL. They're a team that is definitely going to, at the very least, be interesting in terms of Worlds qualification, and TES was able to take care of them, which is massive. A couple of players to really highlight in this series overall, but in this game in particular, my player of the game is going to go to Tion. He's going to get super slept on, not only for this game number 5, but for how good he was across this entire series. His games 1, 3, and 5, their wins were fantastic. He was way better than Jeje in basically all of them. Game 1, Jeje, I think, did play relatively well, but that's it, really. Like, Tion was fantastic in this one in their wins, and he's been really good for this team all year long. I know it's really cool and hip and popular to hate on Tion right now because whatever reason, right? Like, he has bad games every once in a while, as if every other great jungler in the LPL doesn't, right? It's just kind of the meta in terms of LPL junglers. They take a lot more risks than I think your average jungler, and so sometimes it doesn't necessarily work out nearly as much. But Tion is a top, 3 to 4 jungler in the LPL, and I think he's proven that over the course of this split. This was a really good series for him. He's not quite player of the series, but he is going to be player of the game here in game number 5. A great Sejuani game, just setting everything up for this team. They went back to this more poke-style comp, which EDG was piloting at a very high level with the Jace, with the Varus, which we're really seeing at major success levels. And then you've got full forms of Engage if you do want to try and punish once the team does get relatively low when you have that objective control. And so I really like this idea, and I think Tion setting everything up for the Jace, for the Varus in particular, to deal a lot of damage in this game was incredibly important, and I think Tion definitely piloted it well. But player of the series, no surprise, super easy choice, going to go to Rookie in the mid lane. He was phenomenal across this entire series, the entirety of this best of 5. Rookie just completely dominated every single game, and I don't think Fofo was really all that bad, but you want to talk about the most important player in this series, it was Rookie moving around the map and creating advantages in the early to mid game. That gave Top Esports so much pressure in basically every game that there really was no answer from EDG. So Rookie looking awesome, good game of Jace here, and then great game of Varus from Jackie Love. He just does so much damage on this champion. If you have no reliable way to get onto the Varus and you're going into a bunch of squishies, which you kind of are here on EDG, you might not look like it because, Maokai's a little bit of a, Maokai's a tank, quote unquote. We'll talk about why that's not necessarily true. In this case, Skarner can tank some things, but it's really just the Scion that wants to eat things up. And even then, it's not like he has resistances. He just has a ton of health, at least in this game. Jackie Love was absolutely shredding through that entire front line and really was easy to kind of generate a lot of pressure for this team around a lot of objectives. He was the big damage threat for Top Esports in this game, and I think he did a great job of that. Mark looked awesome. A lot of great engages on the Rel. I've seen a lot of comments that it's like, Rel can, anybody can look on Rel. Anybody, Rel's gonna make every support look better. And while I do think that Rel certainly makes engaging easier, we've seen way too many examples of Rel being bad throughout this year for me to say that Rel immediately makes any support better. I think if you're the better support out of the two players in that current game, or if the game state in particular is in a favorable position for you, you're gonna look pretty unstoppable, but you have to put yourself in a good game state to be in that position. If Mark was playing poorly, he would look poor on the rel. We've seen bad rel games all year long from a lot of different players, and so even if I do think that, rel as a champion does simplify the process quite a bit, I think it has more to do with game state than it does like the individual player for why that is. And so really good game from Mark. Wayward was solid on the Poppy, not necessarily like fantastic, but didn't need to be. And again, that's kind of the story of Wayward in the top lane, just has to be okay enough to allow the rest of the players on this team to win games, because they will win you a lot of games. They could win you the LPL. That's how good the players on this team are. But rookie player of the series, Tian player of the game, top esports was awesome across this entire day. And then for EDG, you gave it your best shot. A couple of really solid games. I think the top side of this map played really well. Ale in particular is definitely the big standout in terms of having a really good series. This was a pretty solid Sion game, but I feel really bad. You should not have put him on Sion in game number 5. The pivotal game, you give the player who's playing the best across your entire team at the current moment a tank and a lack of proactivity, and I think that that's very frustrating. I would have much rather seen this draft go in a different direction, but this is what they wanted to do, and this is what they ended up going for, so Ale didn't really have nearly as much of an impact, and they go for the Skarner in game number 5. Now, that is certainly a questionable decision. Jeje's gonna be my dud of the game. This Skarner did not work. I don't really know why they went for it. Maybe it's like dominating scrims or something, but it didn't work in this game, and Tian had full map pressure basically the entire game. As soon as the Sejuani got rolling, there was no stopping top esports, because Jace got fed and Varus got fed way too quickly, and Rel was there to basically full engage anything that the Skarner wanted to do, and so I don't really know. I don't know the point of this pick, but clearly Jeje wanted to go for it, and it might have cost them the series, because that was a pretty bad game, but it was probably his worst of the entire series, and so I don't want to harp on it too much. He was actually pretty good for them. I think Fofo was rather good this series. Maybe not great, but good. Rookie was better, but that shouldn't discredit what Fofo was able to do, especially in their wins. And then Uzi and Mako, like, they were fine, I would say, in this final game. Mako playing, Maokai support. That champion's just not a tank. Like, Maokai support is just not a tank. We were talking about Mako playing it at a high level in the OMG series. Not so much here in the top esports series. It's very exploitable if you have a ridiculous amount of damage, and that's what top esports has. They have damage, and Maokai was just going to melt because he doesn't have items in this game. Uzi tried his best to be able to keep this game close on the Kai'Sa, but he was probably this team's worst performing member up until this point in this series, and so just kind of an overall, moment for EDG. I think Ale played really well, but outside of that, I think everybody else had their down moments, and there are definitely a lot of things that they need to learn from. They still obviously have the opportunity to make Worlds, and going down to a really good top esports team is certainly not the end of the world for them, but you really hope that this team can get it together, because, with this roster, I think they definitely have Worlds aspirations. And then for TES, big win. They now move on to face Billy Gaming, the number 1 seed. We're going to preview that at the end of the video, but for now, they've made it into the double elimination stage, and they've gained that extra life, which is probably the most important part of the process for this team. And now moving on to our second series of this round number 3, and this one is very intriguing. Two very volatile teams going head-to-head. If we have two very consistent, ish teams in the first series, two of the more interesting teams in terms of talent. In the second one, of course, it's a matchup between the number 3-seeded LNG Esports and the number 6-seeded Weibo Gaming, and I really like this matchup for both of these teams, because I think both of them can exploit each other's weaknesses relatively efficiently. When you look at a team like LNG, what is the weakness? Well, their top-end talent is really good, but some people worry about whether or not some of the weaker links on the team are going to be able to hold up. Players like Zika are significantly less tested. A player like Tarzan has not had a particularly great split. Hong has not been super relevant in the playoffs in quite a long time, and so there are question marks about this team. Now, do I believe that those question marks are a little bit overblown? Yes, I think Zika's a very good player. I think Tarzan is going to be more than fine. He's always been better in the playoffs, and then Hong is just a solid support. He's never really had any major issues. I don't understand why that would ever crop up now, but Weibo's got some more, I would say, immediate issues. We've seen, teams, especially in playoff series, start to exploit the top side of this team. The Shy, not necessarily the most consistent player in the entire world, and he's had definitely some trouble in laning phase over the course of the playoffs already, going up against Ninjas in Pajamas and Invincible. Had a couple of really bad games in that series, but he also had a couple of good games in that series, and so if you're getting the good version of the Shy, that's going to be a big benefit towards the team, but if you're getting the bad version of the Shy, this team is it's hard to win. It really is hard to win with that version. So definitely some things to keep in mind. Weiwei is also not a superstar in the jungle. He's a good player, but someone who I wouldn't consider, a dominant player for a top 6 team. I think he's just good. I think the rest of this team is pretty dominant, though. Xiaohu Light, and Crisp is one of the best three-man trios in the entire league, and I think you could say the same thing about LNG with Tarzan, Scout, and Gala at their absolute best. And so, really, really intriguing matchup. I picked LNG in this one. I thought that they would be better, but like I said in that preview series, it really is up to whether or not, Weibo shows up. I think the best version of Weibo is better than LNG, and I think the worst version of Weibo is way worse than LNG, and so it's going to be very interesting to see what ends up happening here. But, of course, we get to kick it off with game number 1 when we go game by game. So, starting with it, our winner of game number 1 was Weibo Gaming. They are able to take the first game of this series. They're able to go up 1-0, and that's a big win. That's a surprisingly big win for this team. Being able to generate some confidence, I think, is massive for this team. If you have a good performance, like when Weibo wins, they win really hard, and honestly, they won pretty hard in this game. They were definitely the better team. LNG's draft is pretty interesting. They're one of the few teams that are still bringing out, not still, I should say, but are actually bringing out Ziggs in the bot lane. I'm a big fan of AP bot laners at the current moment. Obviously, everybody knows how strong Kai'Sa is. It's pretty much pick or ban in every region at the current moment, but I think things like the Ziggs are being undervalued in the East as opposed to the West, where they are being picked up a little bit more frequently. It's going to be interesting to see if more teams adapt to that, but LNG has been willing to pick the Ziggs basically all year long. Gala has very much been willing to play it, and so they pull it out here in game number 1 so they can go for something really aggressive like the Jace plus Nocturne mid-jungle duo, and while it doesn't necessarily work out, I do like the thinking. It's just Weibo playing this a lot better. A scaling comp coming in from them, and they did relatively well early. As soon as they hit the mid game and it was a lead for Weibo, it looked pretty much over because you're playing with a really strong Zeri and a really strong Azir, and when you're doing that, it's going to be very difficult to be able to overcome that. So good stuff from Weibo. Player of the game for me is actually a very big toss-up. I think you could give this to basically any of the 2 carries. I'm going to give it to Xiaohu in the mid lane because I thought his plays were a little bit more flashy, but man, if you wanted to give this to Light on the Zeri, I think he absolutely deserves that as well. 2 really good games from both of the carries on Weibo, and this is what you really want to see. You want to see Xiaohu stepping up. He very much did that against NIP in the previous series. He was awesome. He was my player of the series in that series overall, and Light was very close to winning that award as well, so both of them continuing to perform well in this game I think is definitely something to continue to watch out for, but hopefully you're going to be able to keep that up because Xiaohu's going to need to be a big threat in this series going into a player like Scout, who obviously just won the MVP again, a back-to-back MVP, the 2023 MVP, if you will, winning it both in spring and summer, and for Xiaohu to just outplay him so much in game number 1, be able to survive the early onslaught that Jace ends up giving you if you're Azir, and be able to be super strong in the late game, like that was massive, and Xiaohu, I think being the biggest part of this team goes underrated a lot. But Light and Crisp are also fantastic. Crisp might be the best player on this team. He was really good on the Leona, a pick that I don't necessarily love at the current moment, but is more than good enough when you're playing from ahead to be able to shut things down, and it really opens up opportunities for Zeri. Now, I don't love Zeri plus Engager. It's a big reason why I don't necessarily want teams to be picking up Zeri at the moment if they are going to go Engagers, just because I don't think it necessarily plays into her strengths as a duo in the bot lane in the 2v2 in particular. Even in the late game, I think she likes something that can be a little bit more facilitative rather than something that's just like, okay, we hit the go button now. But I think Light is so good at Zeri that it almost doesn't matter. His positioning is near perfect, and playing into Ziggs is certainly not an easy lane matchup for Zeri, and I think Light was just way better in this game. So really good stuff coming out from him, and I really liked what this bot lane was able to do. Weiwei had a really solid game on the Maokai, was able to create a lot of pressure, but I really do think it was the bot side of the map that really stepped up and really were the carries for Weibo. And then for LNG on the other side, not exactly how you wanted to start this series, especially as the favored seed on blue side, with blue side being so strong at the current moment. Not being able to win with a couple of power picks under your belt is not particularly great. It did feel like basically everybody got outplayed in this game, which is not a great way to start the series. My dud of the game is going to go to Scout in the mid lane. The MVP getting his first playoff start here of the split, and not necessarily performing on a pretty broken champion in the Jace. You wanted to see more aggression in the early game, but honestly, I just don't think he played all that well. His pressure was very much lacking. I think he needed to be way more aggressive, and I think the team very much suffered for it. You need to get this Jace out on the map. You need his damage and his prio in the mid game to be able to establish pressure against a really good, like, front-to-back team fighting comp, and you just didn't have that. You have ways to disrupt it with things like the Nocturne, but if you don't have the damage coming out, it's not really going to matter, and that damage basically needed to come from the Jace, if not from the Nocturne with him getting peeled off. And so Tarzan not playing particularly well, but again, pretty difficult to play the Nocturne in the mid game when you don't really have any winning lanes, and that was kind of the situation. The Ziggs was going to be more of a supportive threat anyways. Hong had some pretty bad engages on the Alistair. Zika wasn't particularly relevant on the Renekton, neither was the Shy. It was just kind of a wet noodle top lane fight, which is fine, I think, for the most part. Definitely good for Weibo in a comp like this, but I need more spice. I need more fire coming out of LNG. This is a team that really does need to step up and be, very competitive against a team like Weibo. You can't just allow them to get everything they want and to play the style that they want to play. If you allow Xiaohu and Light to get to the mid to late game and be able to team fight on champions like this, they're just going to beat you. Xiaohu, in my opinion, is still arguably the best team fighter in the LPL, and Light is certainly not super far behind him. Crisp is really good at that part of the game. Wei has been very consistent. Weibo's very good towards the back half of games, and so I need to see you be a little bit more aggressive, put a little bit more of your foot on the gas, if you will, to create opportunities. And I like the idea behind that for this comp, but it really relies a lot on Scout stepping up, and him having a bad game here, I think, was very detrimental to that. But for Weibo, really nice winning game number 1. If you're going to be able to keep up this kind of prio and momentum, this is going to be a pretty quick series, which we know Weibo is capable of. We know they can beat anybody relatively efficiently. Are they going to be able to do that to a really good team like LNG, or is LNG going to fight back and really turn this one into a series in game number 2? Well, the winner of game number 2 was LNG. They are able to take the second game in this series. They're able to tie it up at 1 apiece, and that was an integral win for this team. This was not a particularly easy game to win. In fact, it looked like LNG were going to be throwing it as this game went further and further along. Weibo continued to get back into it. You look at this comp, you look at a ton of easy ways for Weibo to be able to team fight towards the back half of this game. Very similar to what they had in game number 1, but this time they've got the Vi there as well, which is even more just like point and click engage. Click on whoever you think the threat is, in this case probably the Varus, and just instantly delete him and try to make it a lot easier. A lot of times it ended up being the Jace in this instance, but still a lot of really, really good tools for Weibo, and they did their absolute best to try to get back into this game, but some really fantastic play coming out from LNG, and from their top laner in particular, ends up saving the game. And really, when it comes down to it, it really has to be called a top diff in this game. There really is no other way to put it. I get it. I'm sorry, Kadril probably doesn't like my content anyways because of how I've talked about the Shy up until this point, but he certainly probably did not like watching this game, because really the only reason LNG had any shot of being able to win this was the top diff in this game. And player of the game is pretty easily going to go to Zika in the top lane on this Gwen. Fantastic performance from him. He was really good across this entire game. And if you don't have something like the Gwen being able to deal as much damage as she was able to do in this game, I just don't think there's really any way for LNG to survive the onslaught that Weibo was throwing at them at around the 30-minute mark into this. I just don't think that you end up being able to walk out of this with a W, and if you go down 2-0, I think you're in a really bad spot. So big props to Zika. He was fantastic, and he was one of the question marks. He's probably the least proven player on this LNG team, especially when it comes to playoff success. He's never really had the opportunity to do that on a team like Invictus. Over the beginning part of his career, that team was never really all that good with him on it, but, being thrust into a team like LNG and given so many expectations early on, he was fantastic in spring. Not nearly as much of a carry here in summer, but that's because they brought Gala in and wanted to play a lot more for bot side, and so I can understand why that situation ended up not exactly being, conducive, I would say, towards Zika becoming a superstar, but he was awesome in this game, and if he continues to play really, really well like this team's going to be very difficult to beat, because he, in my opinion, is, quote-unquote, the weak link, and so if he's not your weak link, who is on this team? Because they're all really, really good outside of that. Gala was also really good, was dealing a lot of damage on the Varus, although, a lot of that's poke, and not a lot of it was relevant. Light was out damaging him towards the back half. So was Xiaohu towards the back half of these games, and so you were really relying on being able to chunk them down before fights started, and specifically you were relying on map pressure and positioning to be able to put you in a position where you could get that poke off early. Same thing for Scout, but I think Scout was way too aggressive in this game. It really has not been a great start to the series for him. He almost lost this game for LNG with some of his positioning, but still was doing a good amount of damage, and so I don't want to write everything too off. Tarzan was fine on the Maokai, could have been a little bit more clinical in terms of objective control, but that's being nitpicky. And then I actually think Hang was really good on the Alistair, a couple of really great engages. Him and Zika were definitely the standout members for me, probably the two best. And when you're talking about LNG winning a playoff game, their first playoff game of the summer split, and having Tarzan, Scout, and Gala not be any of the top 2 most important players on the team, I honestly think that's a pretty good sign that Zika and Hang are playing as well as they did in this game. So I would say good stuff overall for LNG. I still want to see them be able to clean up some of the mistakes that they were making towards the back half of this game, the late game here, but Weibo's really good at that part. And so if LNG can, survive, and if Zika can go off like this in team fights, it's going to be, winnable. I think a lot of games are going to be winnable. But for Weibo, the problem rears its ugly head again. Game 2 was a problem for Weibo in the previous series as well, and you were kind of pointing out, where that came from, and a lot of that was coming from topside, and again, it continued to be a problem in this one. Dud of the game pretty easily is going to go to the Shy on K'Sante. This was a bad performance, and Zika being able to get so strong off of this K'Sante, yes, first of all, it's a counter pick, and I understand that, Gwen's really good into K'Sante, but we've seen this matchup about 4 billion times over the course of this split, and K'Sante has won a considerable amount of them. He is strong enough in the meta where you can negate a lot of the advantages that Gwen is generally able to generate, and so the Shy losing as hard as he did just by being too aggressive and not giving enough respect over to Zika as a player is certainly disappointing. He was very useless towards the back half of this game in the team fights, and he was a big reason why Zika was really able to take over, and so got to be frustrating, but, this is a pretty predictable thing to happen to Weibo. This is not the first time that the Shy's bad team fighting has lost them a game and has put them behind in terms of pressure. I think the rest of this team had moments where they looked good. Xiaohu and Light continue to just be fantastic team fighters, and were actually able to generate a ton of leads for this team, in the late game. Unfortunately, they weren't able to hang on to them. A bit of that is, Xiaohu overextending a tad bit, but Weiwei and Crisp, I don't think we're nearly as efficient as they should be. Weiwei definitely had some good moments, but Crisp was basically nowhere to be found across this entire game, which is super frustrating. And this is the problem with Leona, right? Like, this is the reason that I don't think I would prioritize her nearly as high as some of the other, supports in the meta. The Nautiluses, the Rakans, the Alistairs, the other engaged supports that everybody is going to right now. And it's because situations like this, if you're playing from behind, you're not going to be nearly as useful. And Crisp really didn't do anything this game. He was largely irrelevant. This was kind of a 3v5 for Weibo that they tried to win, and unfortunately they weren't able to do that. I still think that they could be in a pretty interesting predicament in this series, and there's definitely still opportunities for them to be able to win games, and I think Xiaohu and Light in particular are playing fantastic in the playoffs so far, but you got to be able to clean up the mistakes. You're really only as good as your weakest links, and in this game, you definitely had the weak links. And then for LNG, it's a good win, but again, some late game problems coming in from this team. I don't think either team is looking all that clinical at the moment, and I think Game 3 is going to be super influential. If one of these teams really comes out and just dominates that game number 3, I think that's going to be a ton of confidence moving into the back end of this series, and so I think Game 3 is going to be very important to be able to establish that momentum. But who's going to be able to take it? Is it going to be LNG, rebounding and saying game 1 really was a fluke, we won the last 2 wars? Weibo going to say we still have control, we're not going to give it up here. Well, the winner of game number 3 was Weibo Gaming. They are able to take game number 3. They're able to take control back in this series, and this was a very, very big win for the team, and it does follow the script that we've kind of been going along with in this series so far, which is the fact that LNG is relatively good in the early game, and then Weibo is going to make some sort of massive comeback, and they did it again. Trust your team fighters. I've been telling y'all that Weibo's really, really good after 25 minutes. They've been probably one of the better teams in the LPL in terms of being able to team fight, basically no matter the composition. In the first 2 games, they leaned in super heavily into it with the Azir and the Zeri, giving you so many tools to be able to create at that point. In this game, it's a little bit different because you're playing into Azir and Aphelios yourself, which is always going to be at least a little bit difficult to try and front to back into, because if you've got Peel coming in from the Poppy and the Renekton, you've got Engage coming in from the Rel, there are tons of ways for LNG to be able to just kind of outplay you, even if you're just as good in that part of the game. But Weibo is just better. That really is kind of what it comes down to, is their players are more clinical at being able to execute in that part of the game, and this was a banger. Like, this was a super close game, and honestly, I would argue that Weibo won this more off of macro than they did in terms of just, front-to-back team fighting, which I think is a really, really good sign. Player of the game for me, pretty obviously going to go to Weiwei in the jungle on this Lilia. We've been seeing Lilia pop up a little bit more frequently in a couple of different circles throughout the year. I think that Lilia as a champion has been, relatively undervalued over the course of this year. I think AP junglers are at an all-time need at the current moment, and Lilia is certainly playable, with picks like Tristana and Jace being so strong. And, I think you could even pull out things like the Yone. Like, I don't think that they're weak really at all, especially if you're good at them. I think the rise of AP junglers is not particularly surprising, and I think that Lilia has kind of not snuck in nearly as much as I thought she would. I think she's a very decent pick right now, and Weiwei was showing that off. You can deal a lot of damage with this champion, especially when you pair it with a couple of marksmen on this team that can follow up relatively easily. If you have the Lilia for setup here, if you can hit a 2 or a 3-man sleep relatively efficiently in some of these team fights, you've got the damage to be able to punish that at an incredibly easy level. The Trist was really good, but it was really Light's Kai'Sa that was dealing a ton of damage in this game, and, that's not particularly surprising. I think the Shy was also really good on the K'Sante. Pretty traditional for him to have a really bad game in game 2 and then follow it up with a much better one in game number 3. He did the the same thing a couple of days ago in that series against NIP in round number 2, just kind of, what the Shy does, back and forth, but Weiwei was definitely the facilitator and the one, I think, creating a lot of offense for Weibo, and the macro game was absolutely on point. Their ability to get Barons in this game is single-handedly what won them the game, because without that, they don't have nearly as much pressure on a lot of the towers that they ended up taking than they would have, right? Like, you had to give up a lot of pressure in some of these fights because LNG does have, they have Scouts Azir, they do have Gall as Aphelios. Like, you don't want to full commit into that, so if you can gain advantages elsewhere on the map, that was always going to be the most important thing, and it felt like Weibo did that at a high level. So overall, just a great series from them, knowing their win condition and knowing how to get there, like knowing that they weren't going to be able to fight LNG, but still knowing that they were better in the late game, and so really good stuff from Weibo. And then for LNG on the other side, it really does feel like you're throwing everything at the wall right now, and nothing is really sticking. You've been outplayed up until this point in this series, and I think that that's pretty clear. Like, yes, I think Gala actually played this game really well. Tarzan, I think, played individually really well, even if some of his map control wasn't exactly there. I think Scout was dealing damage, but you did not have enough pressure in this game to be able to actually win it. You gave up the things that mattered the most. In this case, being Barons. You can't just consistently give up that objective and then let your entire map start to crumble because you have no towers left and you can't really answer with anything. That's a problem. Even if you are finding picks and finding skirmishes and winning some fights, you're never going to be able to consistently generate that lead if you're not able to translate that into success on the map. I always talk about this. This is kind of, I don't want to say the solo queue mentality because I'm not like blaming or accusing LNG of thinking like this, but this idea that kills are as equal as towers are. Kills are important towards the back half of games because it allows you to get towers, right? Like, that's really, what ends up happening. Kills in the early game, it gets you gold, it accelerates the game, and it gives you more opportunities. I absolutely understand that. But when everybody's at 3 or 4 items like they were in this game, and you're picking up kills and you're really not able to do a ton or enough with them, like, what's the point? Like, if you're not able to translate that into map success, then it really was just kind of a wasted fight, if you will, and I think that there was a lot of that for LNG this game. My dud of the game is going to go to Hang in the support position. It just felt like he was completely useless on the rel. You really need some of those engages. You're really relying a ton on the Renekton flank in order to get them if you don't have the rel full engaging, and she just wasn't around nearly as much as you needed her to be. It felt like Hang was actually a little bit behind a lot of the plays, and very similar to what I was saying about Crisp in game number 2, but this time just kind of flipped around, and I think this one was a little bit more noticeable because the rest of the team did play relatively well. Like I said, individually, I really liked how Gala played. I really liked how Tarzan played, but just kind of not enough. Their macro sense was pretty bad, and they weren't able to gain enough advantages to actually be able to take the things that mattered towards the back half of the game. And so, poor performance from LNG, and like I said, they've been outplayed in this series up until this point, but they're now on, like, series point, summer split point, if you will, and that's not where you want to be as the 3 seed. And then for Weibo, you've played a really good series up until this point. Xiaohu and Light in particular, I think, have been great. Light has been awesome throughout this entire series. I think the Shy had a really good game here in game 3. Weiwei was obviously phenomenal. If you can just keep this momentum up, if you can consistently be able to say, it doesn't matter if we lose early, we're going to win late no matter what, that's really hard to play into if you're LNG, and especially if Weibo's going to be able to generate early leads at any point in the series, it's going to become very difficult. And so, like I said, summer point here for LNG. Are they going to be able to keep this series alive, or are they going to fall here and have their summer split end just as early as their spring split ended? Well, the winner of game number 4 was LNG. They are able to take game 4. They're tying up this series, and they're pushing us to a second game number 5 of round number 3. That's 10 total games in this round, which is, of course, the most that you can have. Sorry for the long video. I try to keep these at least a little bit short, but it's hard when we get all 10 games to, go over them in relatively quick fashion, but this was the most dominant game of the series. We've talked about multiple moments where it's been like LNG wins early, Weibo wins late, and that's kind of how things go. But in this one, nope, this was a dominant game from LNG from start to finish. They were the better team by a considerable margin across all of game number 4, and this is the LNG we've been looking for. Where was this team all series long up until this point? I talked about how Weibo had legitimately just been better than them over the course of the first 3 games. That was not the case in game 4. They won every lane, they had all the pressure, and they, closed out this game relatively cleanly. Maybe you could have done it a little bit quicker, but I still think Weibo, offered some threat. Xiaohu was still playing relatively well. Light on the Ezreal made it difficult to siege, so there were options here for Weibo to, not lose in 20 minutes, but LNG dominated. They were the better team by a large margin, and they proved that in this game number 4, so hopefully this is going to be sustainable for them, because this is a team that really has no business being as bad as they were towards the beginning part of this series, in my opinion. player of the game, and a big reason why I think that this team ended up turning it around so much is going to go to Scout in the mid lane. He was awesome in this game for finally a good playoff performance from Scout. He was actually pretty good in their spring playoffs, I will say, even if the team did underperform pretty considerably. I talked about what happened for LNG a lot over the course of this year, where it felt like their bot lane, like everybody knew their bot lane really wasn't all that great, and so teams were hard focusing Tarzan and Scout and just saying like, we're going to take these two out of the game, we're going to put everything we have into making sure these two can't play, and we're going to force somebody else on this team to beat us, and nobody else on that team was going to be able to beat them. And so, you know, they didn't exactly get the best chance to be able to go and perform that, but Scout was really, really good in this game number 4, which is super important to see. We really wanted to see him be able to dominate on one of these super OP picks. Like the Jace, it's kind of interesting to see that Jace is the one that's kind of getting through draft. I agree with that. I think Tristana is a higher value ban in a lot of situations, but banning it on blue side is certainly intriguing. Seeing Scout play super well in the Jace, though, into the Azir. This is what should have been happening all series long. If Xiaohu's going to pick something like the Azir and try to play for late game scaling, then you need to be able to punish him super hard in the early game. And there's not a lot of champions that do that super easily into Azir, but Jace is definitely one of them. And I think that Scout definitely performed a lot better in this game. If he's going to be able to play like this in game number 5 as well, that's a huge turnaround for LNG. That's going to be the biggest difference maker, in my opinion, as to whether or not this team is going to win. Gala was awesome on the Xayah, although really didn't have to do all that much this game. Tarzan was everywhere on the Maokai. Again, AP Maokai actually kind of working out for a lot of these teams. Zika dominated the Shy in the top lane. This was a huge top gap. He was way, way better. Like I said, bot lane really not all that relevant. This was really a big mid diff, and then translating that into a lot of jungle and map pressure, and then just slowly choking out the opponent. Top diff as well. I want to give Zika a lot of credit. He's actually been really good in this series up until this point, but just a lot of really good stuff coming out from LNG. Basically, every positive thing you can say about this team definitely coming through in this game. This was everything we could have asked for them and more, and it really gives them a lot of confidence moving into the final game of this series. And then for Weibo, all that confidence that you had generated and built up, I think, over the first 3 games, I feel like gets kind of deflated in this one, which is really unfortunate. I think this draft does play into your strengths. You just got, like, mega outplayed, if I'm being entirely honest. Out of the game is going to go to Weiwei in the jungle. This was a pretty miserable Ivern performance, which is kind of impressive. Ivern's one of those champions that, like, I think I've maybe seen, like, 1 or 2 bad Ivern games in pro all year long. It's just been really impressive and very difficult to play into for most comps, and Weiwei was not useful in this game. Like, he was not doing anything. The shields weren't mattering. He wasn't getting active and involving himself in a lot of different plays. This just was a bad game from Weiwei. And, you know, to follow that up, you know, to follow the Lilia game up where he did do a lot in the late game and was pretty proactive with this Ivern game where he really wasn't, is definitely, at the very least, a little bit disappointing. I think the Shy got mega gapped in the top lane. Another bad game from him. It's going to happen. Sometimes you lose in the top lane to Zika on the Jax, and you're going to have to live with that. I don't think Light and Crisp were particularly good. Gala and Hang were definitely better, I would say, throughout this series. Xiaohu tried his best to deal some damage, but like I said, Scout was actually super impressive and was moving around the map, and that's going to be the weakness of the playstyle that Weibo ends up employing. I think Xiaohu did basically everything that he did in the first couple of games. He was just actually punished a little bit more for it now. He wasn't allowed to scale up into that late game and be that Azir that could take over in the team fights, and so overall, like, Weibo's got some problems. They've got some things they need to figure out. It is still very winnable for them. They were the better team in every single game, maybe not game 2, but like in, you know, throughout this series up until game number 4, and so you got to at least have some confidence that maybe this game is a little bit of an outlier, but this game is definitely demoralizing. Getting absolutely destroyed in game 4 is certainly not what you wanted to do to go into that Silver Scrapes game 5, but you got to be able to put it behind you, you got to stick to your game plan, and you got to be able to outplay what LNG is going to be able to do. And for LNG, you found the formula. If you win early, you're probably going to win this series. Like, if you dominate early, if you don't allow Weibo to get to the point in the game where they can out-team fight you or out-macro you, kind of like they've been doing over the beginning part, then you're just going to win. Like, your mechanical talent can shine through. Top lane's been a major positive for them. Scout was awesome in this game, and Gala and Hang are definitely more than good enough to be able to win bot pretty consistently, even though Light and Crisp are also pretty good. And so, definitely some strategies coming in, but this is going to be it. Who is going to take game number 5? Who is going to be moving on to the double elimination round? Who's going to be playing off against JD Gaming in that round? Is it going to be LNG or is it going to be Weibo? Well, the winner of game number 5 was LNG. They are able to take game number 5. They're able to make the comeback in this series, and They're going to be moving on to the top 4. Weibo's gotta feel so bad. It felt like they lost so much steam in that game number 4, but man, what a banger of a game number 5 here. It might not look like it in terms of like, you know, kills and dragons and gold and whatever, right, and score lines. It might not look like this game was super close, but dude, Weibo absolutely should have won this game. There really is no excuses for Weibo to be walking out of here with a loss, but they couldn't quite get it done in the back half of this game, and they've got to feel so bad. I would feel so tilted if this were me. Weibo absolutely had an opportunity here, and they just weren't able to complete it. First of all, banger of a series. Every single game was super interesting. Multiple comebacks from multiple different teams. I mean, Weibo did it multiple times at the beginning of the series. Both Game 1 and especially Game 3 were really nice comebacks from them. And then here in Game 5, a massive comeback from LNG. Maybe not a massive one, but LNG kind of surviving, weathering the storm, and being able to win a major late game team fight to win the series. It's massive and it's great from LNG. You wanted to see them be able, I guess, to compete with a lot of what Weibo was doing towards the back half of a lot of these games. And up until this point in this series, they really had not been able to do that. There really wasn't a lot of consistency coming out of them. And that was the big problem, is that, you know, if they drafted early game and they didn't win hard enough, then Weibo was going to be able to kind of catch them out, whether that was in terms of team fighting or macro in the back half of games. And, you know, that was a concern. And Weibo kind of did a similar thing here in game number 5. There was definitely a time where it was like, oh, here it goes again. Weibo's up 3k gold now at 30 minutes, and they're just going to be able to close it out. And, you know, LNG is going to kick themselves for not being more clinical towards the back half of games. But leave it to Gala to be able to bring the game back. The amount of damage that he is able to do on the Varus is absurd. He's going to get player of the game here for LNG. He was fantastic, and honestly, he's going to get my player of the series for LNG. I think you could realistically give this to Zika as well in the top lane. Hell, even Scout, who was so important in their 2 wins towards the back half. But for me, Gala was probably the most consistent member of this team throughout the entire series. I think he was really good. He's going to fly a little bit under the radar because people aren't looking at poke damage in terms of like being super duper relevant, but his damage in every single game was basically topping the charts, maybe with the exception of game 4. He was like topping the charts every single game in terms of damage. So Gala looking really good. Love him on a pick like the Varus that just gives him a little bit of versatility. He's even willing to pull out things like the Ziggs as we saw in game number 1, and so just a lot of flexibility in terms of how he wants to play the game, and he was a massive asset. This is the difference here. Bringing Gala in to replace LP. I know I'm kind of harping on it, but like, that was the difference maker in this pivotal game number 5, was the new addition Gala for this LNG team. And so congratulations to this team. It's already paying dividends to have made that mid-season roster adjustment, but really good game from Gala. Scout was still really good in this game, 9-1-9 on the Azir. His team fighting was really solid, but he wasn't nearly as proactive as I think he was on the Jason game 4. That's okay. Like, you're not going to be as proactive into something like Tristana, which is just going to be able to move around the map a little bit easier, but the Skarner redemption game, it didn't necessarily work in the first series of the week. In the pivotal game 5, Tarzan saying, nope, I'm actually going to also pull it out when my season's on the line, and this time I'm going to win on it. Skarner was actually a problem for Weibo. There really were a lot of good targets to end up pulling here. If you were able to eventually get onto the Tristana or the Zeri, that's massive, but even getting onto something like the Ivern was a really big deal for Weibo, because they didn't really have a lot of good answers to be able to, you know, kind of survive an onslaught without Ivern shields, and so really good stuff from Tarzan, and Skarner I think was much more relevant this game. Zika continued to be the much better top laner, even if the Shy was like dealing a ridiculous amount of damage. He was so aggressive in this game on the Poppy, and honestly, I didn't hate what the Shy was able to do, but Hang was fine on the Nautilus. This really just was Gala, and Gala stepping up, Tarzan being good, Scout being good, but the main 3 really being the ones to carry you across the finish line, and this is why you invested. This is why you go out and make that mid-season adjustment for games like this. And then for Weibo on the other side, God, you got to be frustrated with how your season, or your split, I should say, is going to end. Your season's not over. You still got the regional qualifier, but this is how your split ends. And man, this is probably not how I would want my split to end. You should have won this game. There really is no excusing it, but done of the game for me is going to go to Weiwei on the Ivern. He was not proficient on this champion at any point in the series. Game 4 was bad. Game 5 was bad. And that's disappointing. I think Ivern's in a really strong state, and so if it's just not on the table for Weibo, I think that's not very good. You would like to be able to facilitate, you know, Xiaohu and Light and these big players to be able to carry the game, but it just doesn't feel like something Weiwei is going to be able to play at a high level. He was a big reason why they ended up losing this series, which is super unfortunate to say, but I think Xiaohu and Light in general just weren't as clinical in this game. Couple of over forces coming in from them, which I guess they kind of felt like they needed to do, but, you know, I would say this was probably their combined worst game of the series. I actually liked what the Shy was able to do in game 5 here. Crazy amounts of damage on Poppy. He was putting himself in pretty awful situations to do that damage, and he was dying a little bit more frequently than he needed to, but I would still say overall a positive game for him, and he might have been the best player on Weibo in this game 5. And then Crisp, again, on Leona, just not able to do anything. Really not in a situation where in those late-game team fights he was actually able to keep up. And so Weibo's split is done. They're going to be eliminated here. No double elimination yet, so no shot for that. But this isn't a huge upset. I don't think they were entirely shocked to see themselves go out to LNG. They probably should have seen themselves winning this series with how it ended up playing out, but just not going to be the case, and so they're going to now have to prep for the regional qualifier. This is still an incredibly dangerous team, though. They're very feast or famine, but if they're feasting, this is definitely a team that still has the potential to go to Worlds, and I could see them having a better performance in that tournament. But congratulations to LNG. They're facing JD Gaming in the next round, which certainly is not an easier test, but they now get into the double elimination bracket, and so a bit more security and stability moving into the couple series moving up. But again, congratulations to this team. They narrowly eke out a win in this series. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL Round 3 overview and analysis video. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. We got 10 really fun games in this video from both Top Esports EDG and from LNG Weibo, and so I really do hope you guys had a lot of fun. We have Top Esports and LNG moving on. That means that EDG and Weibo have officially been eliminated. Of course, both of them are going to be in the regional qualifiers, so their seasons are not officially over yet, but a lot of momentum being generated, and now we have officially reached the top 4 in the LPL, which means double elimination has started. The losers of these upcoming series are not going to be eliminated. They are just going to be put down into lower brackets. So these series are important, but mostly for momentum. And I think you have a pretty good idea of where I'm going to be going. Previewing Top Esports BLG and then JDG LNG. First of all, if you want a complete in-depth breakdown, check out the video up in the iCard right now. I did a full bracket prediction in my playoff primer for the LPL before the playoffs started. And I did predict this to be the top 4, as I think a lot of other people did. Actually, I think the bracket's gone exactly as I predicted up until this point, except for NIP beating RNG. But that's neither here nor there. Not a lot of surprises, but I think that if you want to break an individual breakdown of these performances, I'm going to give a small one here, but go check that video out. For Top Esports BLG, I just think BLG is like on fire right now, and I think individually speaking, they're one of the few teams that can mechanically go up against the best players of Top Esports. I think Elk is just as good as Jackie Love, arguably, and I think that Tion is going to struggle to play consistently into someone as aggressive as June, and so I've got Billy going over in that one, and then JD Gaming versus LNG. I just think JDG is the best team in the world when the games matter the most, and right now, I think the playoffs are a pretty good situation for that. LNG still has some holes, still has some question marks. They weren't the most consistent team. Honestly, I feel worse about them after their win against Weibo than I did, before that series, where I thought that they would be a pretty solid team. They were not all that solid in that series. They actually looked very beatable, and I think JD Gaming is going to be able to take advantage of that. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you guys agree that BLG and JDG just feel kind of unbeatable, or do you think that there's a potential for an upset here in round 4? Would love to know you guys' thoughts, and of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people. Of course, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We post about the LPL playoffs every single game, and so, as these rounds keep going on, if you want more LPL updates, this is the place for it. Of course, we don't only post about the LPL on this channel. We post about all 4 of the major regions as well as the NACL, and so if you want a comprehensive overview of everything happening in LoL Esports at the moment, which includes basically all of the playoffs that are starting around the world right now, this is the place for it. With Worlds coming up, you want to get some knowledge and info on some of the teams you might not be as familiar with, this is the place for it. I hope you hit the subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. I promise you will not be disappointed. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all